reasons I want to talk now is because I think after 20 years, somebody shifts from being a contemporary person to one of history, actually. And Diana deserves a place in history. Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person in the modern world.
This shot's worth a lot of money.
The detectives could be watching us. Down to the sea. Binoculars. It's just come out again. There's movement down there. That wasn't her. Oh, you know. She spotted us.
No, she hasn't. It's just because we're looking at her. Do you know how small we would be from there?
That is fairly disgusting stuff. They weren't really paparazzi. I called them at the time stalkerazzi.
The cops are working out how they can get her out without us taking a picture.
You know, all the media that hounded Diana was feeding an insatiable beast, and that was the public.
It's kind of amazing to look back in the 80s and the 90s because now we're so accustomed to this 24-hour news cycle. The TMZ and the Instagrams and the social medias and the Kardashians and everybody's famous. But back then, there was none of that. It was all about Princess Diana.
The public always feels a real connection with celebrities and public figures who they watch grow and evolve. And we certainly watched Diana grow from this very shy young woman who was marrying the prince to being this global powerhouse superstar. We watched an incredible evolution over those 17 years.
It's, of course, truly tragic that she's not here. Well, I do regret not. I mean, I wish I could have done more to protect her. This is the person I grew up with. Well, we're pretty basic, really. We were sheep farmers a long time ago who struck it lucky.
So the Spencers are not royalty, They're an aristocratic family.
Spencer's had all these wonderful relations, like George Washington.
Winston Churchill, the great Prime Minister, he was a Spencer. They're a very, very important family.
My family were quite outward thinking. One of my ancestors was against slavery before his time. Other members of my family were pro-American independence when that was thought to be treacherous. Ladies of the Spencer family have been very charitable and glamorous, and in many ways, Diana is the sort of the coming together of so many strands of this family.
Spencer's rubbed shoulders with the royal family. Diana was not a commoner. She was actually born on the Sandringham estate, where the Spencers rented the house from the royal family.
My earliest memories of her, she always had a sort of natural star quality. She could strike a pose in clothes she had borrowed from my eldest sister.
When Diana's a little girl, she starts to realize how people fall in love with her. She was one of those children that goes into the room and everyone is charmed by her.
It would be wrong to think of Diana as a saintly child. I mean, she was quite naughty. Never with malice, you know, just sort of pushing the boundaries. Well, my mother and Diana are actually quite alike. They were both glamorous, very quick-witted, and great fun. She inherited from my father this very great gift for understanding people and caring about things that mattered. Every time I think of her, I think of this little girl, you know, back then. She always tried to do the right thing. And I think after my mother left, she used to help around the house. You know, she'd check the curtains were closed at night, and she took on a sort of semi-maternal role around the household, I think. Divorce has been part of the American culture for a very long time. The English had a way of just burying their head in the sands. If a marriage didn't work, you just quietly got on with it. At some social occasions, such as horse racing at Royal Ascot, where the Queen was present, if you're a divorcee, you weren't allowed in the royal enclosure. So an actual divorce was a very big deal, and of course there was a scandal attached because my mother had actually run off with someone else.
It was the subject of an extraordinary court case.
People used to talk about her mother as a bolter and be, you know, really disapproving of her.
I remember being told she'd gone away on holiday. So maybe there was an expectation she might come back.
Nobody really told Diana why her mother had left. She was 6 years old. What could she possibly have comprehended?
She used to sit on the doorstep and wait for her to come back. I think there was a period where she felt very isolated, and it was tough for her, which is a terribly sad thought, but she'd never healed.
This is one of the saddest things about Diana, because her two older sisters were away in boarding school, and Diana's father sunk into a fairly deep depression. She had a series of nannies, but none of them gave her what she really needed. She lacked a consistent source of support and love.
It was really the two of us growing up together alone.
Dancing was something she'd always adored. She was a natural performer. She took her exams at boarding school, and then there's pictures of her on point. She got rather a long way with it.
She was sadly too tall to be a conventional ballet dancer. She then turned her talents to tap dancing. The hall here, with its black and white marble, was the perfect sound. And I remember her just for hour after hour doing her tap.
I think it was a release, and it was doing something that was totally different. It was an escape.
She loved all the trappings of ballet as well, the romance, the prince, the beauty of it. She really loved the fairy tales.
Diana did have a great sense of romance, but unfortunately, one of her favorite authors was Barbara Cartland, whose stories are not really anything to do with real life.
A woman should be elusive. She should be a nymph flying away from the sartor. But at least you should make some pretense of not being ready to fall into his arms like an overripe peach.
She had a kind of fantasy view of what it was like to be a princess, shaped by her step-grandmother, Barbara Cartland.
You know, the virgin bride, handsome groom, future king, future queen. They might have given Diana the wrong idea about real life.
Diana had in mind all the time that she was destined for big things. Almost like a fairy tale. That she was going to nab a prince.
On the screen, on the newspapers. I don't think anyone can understand, unless you were there, what it was like to have this woman explode in our faces.
On an informal visit to India, Charles was accompanied by his uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten of Burma. As India's last viceroy, Lord Louis had presided over the transfer of power. Prince Charles could not have had a better guide.
Lord Louis Mountbatten, known to everybody as Dickie, was a heroic figure for Charles. He had been a decorated naval officer during World War II, the head of defense.
Prince Charles very much took to Mountbatten as a sort of father figure who he could learn from.
Mountbatten says to me, you know, Prince Charles has a perfectly normal sex life, you know. And I thought, where's this coming from? He said, you see, I've been helping him.
The advice that Dickie Mountbatten gave him, have as many affairs as possible. He should sow his wild oats. And then he should find a sweet charactered girl to put on a pedestal and marry her.
I guess everybody knew that Prince Charles was going to take a spouse of some kind. It was like a high-end version of The Bachelor. He's seen here, he's seen there. Who will it wind up being?
Girls would scream and they'd go crazy. He was regarded as so dashing, so handsome.
He was very much action man. He loved to do masses of rather daring things, pushed himself to all the limits.
In my early days of photographing Prince Charles at the Polo Grounds at Windsor, it was an eligible young prince. It was a succession of different girls arriving.
Oh, a lot of blondes on arm and a lot of sailing the ocean way.
He was tan and he loved to walk around with his shirt off.
And he always had bevies of ladies following him.
The papers unveiled a cavalcade of girlfriends. Davina Sheffield, pursued across airport tarmacs, had already discovered just how irksome it can be. So had Lady Jane Wellesley.
Pretty intolerable, yeah. It's not easy for a girl to take all of that on board. They broke into my house, they left notes, followed me everywhere. Definitely a deterrent. I mean, what they wrote was brutal. You're sort of fed to the lions. Camilla was to him just a safe haven, someone he could talk to.
They met in the summer of 1972. She loved the countryside, hunting and shooting and riding, all the things that he enjoyed.
Camilla knew exactly how to get to Charles's heart, which was to flatter him, to tell him how brilliant he was, to stroke him. And I think that's one of the reasons why he found her so irresistible.
For an heir to the throne, he was supposed to marry somebody who at least appeared virginal.
So for Camilla, going to bed with Charles and having, I think, a genuine, strong love affair with him, mentally, with the heart, as well as physically, she had ruled herself out. You know, those who have been bedded cannot be wedded.
Most of the young women he knew were not, in fact, virgins. So, in effect, he had to rob the cradle. He had to reach down to somebody who was 19 years old.
Charles and Diana had always been aware of each other because the families were so intertwined, but they met properly when he was dating her older sister.
He met Sarah Spencer in 1977. In the course of their romance was the first time that Diana actually met him. She was a 16-year-old schoolgirl, and, you know, she was kind of bedazzled by him and even got a little competitive with her sister.
When the relationship with the older sister fizzled out, Charles began to think more seriously about Diana. She was beautiful, she was aristocratic, she was charming, she was sweet, she was kind. It was the ideal wife.
This is exactly the sort of girl that Uncle Dickie recommended. Charles, right from the beginning, was aware of the problems of getting involved with a much younger woman with different tastes.
He wanted to be married by 30, and he passed that deadline. Family putting pressure on him, felt that he had no choice. And he had in his head that he was going to learn to love Diana.
Hard to believe the turmoil Britain was in the very early 80s.
People throwing cabbages at each other at bus stops.
Anarchy in the UK. God save the Queen.
Strikes were so bad. Rubbish wasn't taken out of the streets. There was electricity blackouts all the time.
Look at the images of Queen Elizabeth with things over her mouth. They were done.
There was a huge disdain for the royal family. A growing part of the population that thought, why are we supporting these spoiled aristocrats when we can't put food on our table?
No future, the Sex Pistols would say. And now all of a sudden, here comes the future.
Diana was a disruptor. She came at a time when the royal family was seen as being stuffy and old-fashioned. She was new, no one knew anything about her before. She was the right way to start a fairy tale.
My job, given me by the editor at the time, was to find out who Prince Charles was going to marry. My contact said he's with a girl called Lady Diana Spencer. She worked in a nursery, and I went round to about 4 or 5 different nurseries. I said, does Lady Diana Spencer work here? He said, yes, she does. I said, would she come out for a photograph?
There's the famous picture of her standing in London Square,
holding children at a nursery school.
with a rather transparent skirt on.
She posed up, and halfway through taking the photographs, the sun came out.
You could see the outline of her legs through the skirt.
Oh, gosh, she's got good legs.
This was the page 1 picture then, and the headline was Charlie's Girl. She was horrified.
Beauty needs no resume. Diana was many, many other things aside from beautiful, but she was beautiful. And that is the coin of the realm.
Our tabloids in the UK are considered among the worst in the world. They suddenly had this new stock character.
Every time we put her on the front page, negative story, positive story, picture, Princess Diana would add sales.
There was so much demand for these stories on a daily basis. You could make hundreds of thousands of pounds with one picture. Because not only would you sell it here, you could sell it around the world.
When I press this button, a new era in photography begins. Polaroid introduces sonar automatic focusing.
When autofocus cameras came in, anybody, even a monkey, could point a long lens at someone and get a pretty reasonable, good quality picture.
Try, John. Me? Sure. E1 is so simple, you can really concentrate on your subject.
A new breed of photographer came in that didn't really have much respect for a profession or really most of the time for who they were photographing.
Lady Diana.
It'd be, hundreds of photographers all trying to get pictures of Diana outside her flat.
You caught sight of her scurrying with her head down towards a car, pursued by a mob of paparazzi.
Although she didn't invent the paparazzi, she gave them a shot in the arm. She was like pure heroin for the press.
She seemed to know instinctively what the perfect shot was.
Diana, while pretending to ignore the media when she came out, had obviously spent hours indoors beforehand getting ready so she looked her best.
She would flirt with the camera.
Sometimes she'd chat to photographers like Arthur Edwards.
I remember once I was wearing his hat, and she'd say to me, you wearing that hat for a bet,
She needed to try and get a feel for what might come next.
Is there any comment to make about that?
Lady Diana.
No comment all round. Have a good weekend, though. Go to work now, okay?
For all of us that had been covering the royal beat, it was obviously this was the girl. And then we went off to India with Prince Charles. And I remember we said to him, I really like Lady Diana Spencer, she's lovely. And then he said something quite profound. He said, you can live with a girl for 2 years and then get married if you want. He said, I can't do that. He said, I've got to get it right first time or you'll be the first to criticize me. And they were prophetic words.
Diana and Charles's courtship was quite formal. She still called him sir.
They were only together a dozen times before he proposed. And very few of those were private moments.
It was quite hard for Diana to properly get to know him, and indeed for them properly to get to know each other.
After spending most of the day at Buckingham Palace, Lady Diana went tonight to Clarence House. Prince Charles arrived soon after Lady Diana, after the briefest of drives along the Mall.
The day Diana got engaged, I hadn't told anyone because I didn't think it was that interesting to anyone. And I remember going into a lesson and the master got a message and he went, "Your sister's just got engaged to Prince Charles." And I went, "Yes." And he went, "Why haven't you shared it with us?" Well, it hadn't crossed my mind.
He's 32, she's 19. He's a prince, she's not a princess yet. He likes horses, she doesn't. He's Prince Charles, she's Lady Diana Spencer. They are engaged, they will be married.
You know the engagement has just been announced.
No, we didn't.
Prince Charles is engaged now to Lady Diana Spencer.
Oh, thank goodness.
I think it's marvellous, really do. I've been waiting for it.
Diana was certainly in love with Charles, and I think that at times he was in love with her. Or said he was.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Well, it
Put your own interpretation.
Obviously means two very happy people.
That's not very encouraging, is it?
In Charles's world, marriage was about a lot of things, but it wasn't really about true love. Within the royal family, marriages were pretty much arranged. And that's how he saw his bride.
When the engagement was announced, that was it. The entire press pack of the world descended on London.
Although it was the prince who inspected the Shaw establishment, it was once again Lady Diana who was the centre of public attention.
Diana was now public property. This girl who'd just been a nursery school teacher, that lives this very easy, innocent life, was suddenly swept up into this massive media frenzy. Diana's engagement ring sold out, Diana's suit sold out.
We learned just how popular Lady Diana's hairstyle really is, and just how easy it is today for every woman to look like a princess.
When I was at boarding school, she came to take me out. And it was rather bizarre because she appeared in her mini metro, being pursued by the press. There were about a dozen cars and motorbikes, etc. And I just thought, this is really odd and really unpleasant, actually.
Come on, let's. Come on.
Robert Lacey, do you think that Lady Diana yet fully realises how tough life will be in the full public gaze?
Well, I'm sure she does. I mean, we've just seen it, haven't we? I don't think there can have been a future consort who's been through anything like it.
It's not much fun watching polo when you're being surrounded by people with very long lenses. And I think all this adds up to a certain amount of strain each time.
So she's been through, in a way, the worst that can be thrown at her. I think it'll be easier from now on.
Oh, I think it's going to be much easier. Obviously, living in Clarence House with bodyguards will make life much easier. And I think, too, we're going to see a change in the attitude of the press. All this telephoto lens business will stop.
It was the fairy tale wedding of the age. No one knew what was about to happen.
It's 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 28th of July. Along the wedding procession route from Buckingham Palace to St. Paul's, the sightseers who've been camping out all night are waking up to a bright summer morning.
Such a unique occasion, and it'll never happen again.
There's only one Monaco.
And you're going to look at the next king and queen, haven't you?
And there are about 30 campers here outside Buckingham Palace, waiting for Lady Diana to come out in that most secret wedding dress tomorrow.
Diana's wedding dress was one of those most speculated things in the media at the time.
The first meeting, it was brilliant, actually. She was unexpected because when she'd phoned up to make an appointment, I got her name wrong.
David and Elizabeth Emanuel never made a royal wedding dress before. How did they feel when they first heard?
Over the moon, very thrilled. We'd only been out of college for 1 year. She could have gone to far more experienced designers. But we did have a vision. We wanted it to be dramatic, something people would remember. We wanted people weeping, you know, crying how beautiful this is. This is the ultimate fairy tale princess wedding dress. Only when she came into our studio, we realized quite how young she was. She was 19. She sort of still had a bit of puppy fat. There was already lots of, not just press, but people just waiting. They would wait there for hours, days, to see if she would come in for a fitting. We had to hide things from the press, leave false trails because they would go through our bins every night, put blinds up on all our windows. Even when we ordered the fabric, we ordered ivory and white. So they could never be completely sure of what color the dress was going to be. Most brides do lose weight.
She lost a lot of weight. Her dressmakers kept having to take it in and in and in.
She went from 26, 27 inch to a 23-inch waist. Her face had slimmed down. She looked like a model. She just walked more confidently. She just was suddenly growing up, turning into a woman.
The wedding will have an audience of more than 500 million people. That's a sixth of the world population. The 3 American networks devoting more time to it than almost anything else in living memory. The ABC network has brought in hundreds of extra staff, dozens of extra cameras, and a whole new control room. Quite simply, it's going to be the biggest television event ever.
This is the time to say, this is what Britain is. We're coming together. It's unity. This is our royal family.
What an extraordinary moment. What you will see now is a story of 2 very real young people beginning their life together in front of the eyes and ears of the world.
They're the world's monarchy. I can walk down the street and no one's going to know who's the king of Spain or who's the king of Denmark. Everyone knows the Queen of England.
There is something about the royals that touches Americans in an incredibly visceral way. It touches Americans just like it touches people all over the world.
It was one of those scenes you remember for the rest of your life.
I got up in the middle of the night with my brother and we watched it from beginning to end. You were glued to the television.
And this is a wonderful moment as we wait, and we'll see that wedding dress which has been kept such a wonderful secret. There we are.
Lady Diana has broken with several traditions today.
In her ceremony, she will not say that she promises to obey. She will love and cherish. In the last royal wedding, the wedding of Princess Anne, she did promise to obey, and so did Queen Elizabeth. But these are different times.
You can tell that she has arrived.
I went to see Diana the day of her wedding, and she was looking incredibly beautiful in this dress, which, of course, I'd never seen before. I was so proud of her the whole day. I was really proud of the whole way it went and the fact that she'd been so dignified throughout it.
Two of her bridesmaids waiting on the steps of St. Paul's. And here, our first glorious view of the bride.
Out stepped this vision in the dress that was just like a fairy tale.
This is magnificent. I have never seen a train like this.
All those yards of taffeta. Yards and yards and yards. I thought it was never going to end when she got out of the carriage.
Taffeta does crumple. That's the nature of the fabric. We noticed that the dress had got very creased, more than we'd anticipated. I started doing the bottom of the dress and the hem. It was quite a hairy moment. Creases or not, I think that's my favourite bit of the entire wedding, because for me, it's always been about a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, and that is her story. She was emerging into a new world, a new life's adventure, turning into a beautiful princess.
I think the thing I remember was the enormity of St. Paul's Cathedral and that huge aisle stretching before her.
That was a 3.5-minute walk down that aisle. And inside the cathedral, there were 3,000 guests who'd been invited.
The concern was one she'd expressed to me before, which was how was her father going to cope walking up the aisle, because he wasn't well.
He'd had a very bad stroke a few years before, and the royal family had sent a message that I would have to lead her up the aisle because he wouldn't be able to do it. But he was very stubborn and courageous, and he managed to do his task, and he was very proud of that.
People bought in. People bought in 100%. It was the fairy tale wedding of the age. No one knew what was about to happen.
Diana, Charles, Camilla. The fates of those three people would be intertwined. But on that day, the world was watching Diana say her vows to her prince.
I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
London now sees for the first time their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
750 million people watched this wedding take place around the world. It looked as though they were really in love, and that's what we wanted to see.
That is your classic quintessential Cinderella moment. And just thinking how much her life has been transformed, how much it would change.
Like we know how to run a sports event in America. They knew how to do a royal wedding. And you could see it in the crowds, you could see it in the pageantry. It was just a joyous moment.
The window is open on this famous royal balcony, and out come the bride and groom. And what an extraordinary moment for the new Princess of Wales to look out on this sea of human beings. That's what everybody's been waiting for.
The honeymoon couple on their way out into the now.
The Princess of Wales, her life now changes totally.
I think really anyone with a sense of human nature who cared to think about it could have seen many, many issues going on that day.
Yes, of course. Under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Parker Bowles, Charles and Lady Diana stayed with him and his wife Camilla in Wiltshire on 2 occasions at the end of the year.
I watched it on the television, and I just remember looking across and everyone sitting there, and I just said, sadly, I just don't think this will survive. I think she's just too young to take it all.
She was a very young woman. She was not prepared for what lay ahead.
Into the gates of Broadlands. And as the gates close upon them, may they carry the memories of this remarkable day with them for the rest of their lives to cheer them into the unknown.
The particular moment I remember when they looked very, very romantic. He was sort of completely smitten by her. Was when they were walking in the heather by the river. The protocol at Balmoral on the honeymoon. And it was, they just looked so sort of in love, and he was gazing at her, and he kept picking up her hand and kissing it, just like a sort of Prince Charming would. And she kept putting her head on his shoulder, and it was all very, very romantic.
Madam, how are you enjoying married life? Highly recommend. How do you like Balmoral as a place?
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
She seemed to be having a great time, but in fact, she couldn't stand being at Balmoral. She felt oppressed and hemmed in. She began to obsess about Camilla.
On the honeymoon yacht, Charles was wearing cufflinks that Camilla gave him. Diana knew perfectly well they came from Camilla. It's a strange thing to do on your honeymoon, to wear your ex-girlfriend's gifts. No, I think a bit of fisticuffs might come in there. I'd have done it.
She said she saw a picture of Camilla slip out of his diary, and all she did was worry about her and whether Charles was really telling her the truth.
Camilla is the wicked stepmother in the Diana story right from the beginning. And I actually feel quite sorry for Camilla, because just as Diana was caught by antiquated values, so Camilla was also trapped. Charles meets Diana, but right from the beginning, there's the shadow of Camilla there all the time. It's a very sad photograph of Camilla and Diana side by side at Ludlow Racecourse. They were there because of Prince Charles in some way. And you look at that picture and you think, what is going through the minds of those two women? Camilla, already Charles's mistress, and the girl beside her who's going to discover. When you see that, I certainly feel pity for Diana because she was getting involved in a big game that she didn't know half the details of at that stage.
Diana had no idea what she was stepping into. Part of the royal duty was traveling the world. Diana was new to this and nervous.
The first Wales trip, of course, was very soon after they came back from their honeymoon. It was the first time she was on a trip out with the public. Well, we'd had royal walkabouts before. The Queen was pretty good at doing them.
In New Zealand, she mingled with her subjects, enjoying times like this probably more than the great occasions of state.
When she does a walkabout, it's sort of staying back from the crowd. So she'll walk over to the crowd, but there'll be a gap. She won't go right up to the barrier and reach in. She'll stand back and she'll extend her arm out and take some flowers, but you won't see her putting her arm in and touching people or giving a child a hug. It would be very, I'm here and you're there. With Diana, it was completely different. If there was a small child with some flowers, Diana would go down low to the child's level. You wouldn't see that with the other members of the royal family. It hadn't happened like this before.
She was so tactile with them. She would go to a hospice and she'd sit on the edge of the bed and she'd talk to the lady or the man in the bed as though she'd known them all her life. Oh, no one ever did that. They would all stand there a little bit away, nod and smile, and then walk out the room, but not Diana. She would get involved. She would take part in it.
The tour of Wales. The amount of people that were there just taking photographs was enormous. Never seen anything like it. I used to say, behave. You can take your photographs, but behave.
A British newspaper, The Observer, says the next royal heir will be a boy. Princess Diana has learned through routine medical scans the child could be second in line of succession to the throne.
Everyone was writing sort of all these quite personal details. Is she going to have a natural birth? Is she going to do this? Is she going to do that? Can you imagine having your pregnancy scrutinised? It must have been quite embarrassing and uncomfortable to have all that played out in the media and so publicly.
The competition's fierce. We went for it. We wanted to get exclusive. It just was how you worked.
They had unlimited expenses, they would travel anywhere, and they were encouraged to be intrusive. They followed Princess Diana when she was pregnant to an island in the Caribbean.
Those journalists, they get up, these portly middle-aged men crawl through the undergrowth for hours with the sweat and the mosquitoes and everything, as if they were on some sort of military exercise, which in a way they were, with their long lenses and everything. And there they catch pictures of Diana pregnant.
Got the pictures. There was a massive row about it.
Bahama Mama. Shocking. Taking sneak pictures of a woman who's pregnant is a nasty thing to do.
A photograph of the future Queen of England pregnant in a bikini, taken from hiding by photographer Arthur Edwards of The Sun.
They were sensational pictures, but they were paparazzi pictures, not good, lovely pictures.
Are you ashamed of taking the pictures, the pregnancy
no,
pictures?
I don't feel ashamed at all. I mean, it was an assignment. I was sent there to do it, and I did it.
They know that if we aren't there, someone else will have to do the job.
I remember landing at Heathrow and turning on the radio, and there was members of Parliament asking questions in the House of Commons here about intrusion. There was the press secretary to the Queen being very condemnatory on the radio. And I was pretty low about it, and I got to the office, and the office driver I met spat on the floor, and it made me feel terrible. But the editor was delighted. The editor was Kelvin Mackenzie.
He actually welcomed Arthur, putting his arms round them, and he was determined that it would go on the front page.
He publishes the first picture of Bahama Mama and gets a pushback from Buckingham Palace. And then there's essentially a "f you" the next day, where he says, no, we're going to do it again.
The photographers had never covered the royal family like this before. All of the old rules had gone out the window, and there was a new game.
Those two coming together on that floor, in that building, wow, right? Wow.
In England, it's a boy. 7 pounds, 1 ounce, no name yet, but that country is jumping.
On the steps of the hospital.
In the past, royal children were confined to nurseries, looked after by nannies. Diana didn't want that for her children.
Taking William on tour, no child had ever been taken on a royal tour before. Diana sort of insisted on that. I remember going to Australia. The whole of the business class section was sold out. With journalists and photographers and TV crews going out to cover it.
Charles would write letters to his friends saying how much fun they were having with William. Those were tender moments of togetherness.
Everybody was saying, good luck, and I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many, many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when you're back to town.
On their Australian tour, the Prince and Princess of Wales have been swamped by exuberant crowds as spectators surged across security barriers to see them.
The Princess of Wales was again the centre of attention, as she has been throughout the tour so far.
I remember once in Sydney, we were doing a walkabout. He'd be one side of the road, she'd be the other side of the road, and there'd be 20 photographers doing Diana, and there'd be no one doing Charles. And the press officer screaming at us, would someone please cover the Prince?
Can you imagine they're screaming for your husband to get out of the way so they can photograph you? Your husband, the future King of England?
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half. She can do both sides.
This little boy came up to the Prince of Wales. He said, "Oi, Charlie, where's Diana?" And he turned around and he said, "She's not coming today, son. You better ask for your money back."
People who met Diana fell in love with Diana.
First of all, she was stunning, but she was demure. She had a style of her own that I'd never seen on anybody else. And, you know, she would, like, glint, you know, sort of mischievously. But if you said something outright, she'd blush like anything. She'd go, "Oh," and then this blush would come in, which was so endearing.
She was like a silent film star. Everything was expressed through those huge blue eyes. She cut this perfect image that everyone could project some part of themselves onto.
With Diana, when she walked into a room, it was like a magnet. You couldn't stop looking at her. And she was on the next level from celebrity when you saw her. There was just such a presence of her.
In 3, 2, 1. Do you know how we all fantasize we're going to grow up and marry a rich man and be a princess? Is this like seeing the woman who got it all?
I don't think anybody has it all. I think to a certain extent she's a bird in a gilded cage.
It's a penalty of the job. Did you find it difficult to adapt?
The press, it grew into this monster. People were wanting to see every intimate, private moment. It's an endless life of having to be on best behavior, watching what you say, being politically correct. On top of that, trying to have a marriage, trying to raise children. I mean, the pressures must be huge, painful every day to think that every move you make is being watched and commented and criticized by the world. My God, who would choose that?
Waited to congratulate the Princess Diana, who has issued forth with a second child. It is a boy.
It's a boy. Royal birth was a national cause for celebration.
When Harry was born, everybody in polo circles was talking about the way in which Prince Charles had rather casually gone to the hospital to see the baby.
At the entrance to Kensington Palace, the Prince and Princess and their baby arrived from the hospital at speed. Less than an hour later, Prince Charles left to play polo, something most new fathers would hardly dare to suggest.
The story that was told was that he came out furious and early, complaining that the baby had ginger hair. Charles said he looks like a Spencer. And of course, in a way, Harry does look like a Spencer.
How do you think he feels about his wife today?
He certainly loves her. I don't think he's in love with her. I don't think it's the great love match. To begin with, it was a marriage of convenience. They're much, much happier now because she's come to grips with the job. I still don't think he's in love with her, but he respects her, and she is the only woman in his life.
Well, I don't think it was a tremendous lot of fun for Diana, actually. I don't think she saw very much of Prince Charles. It wasn't there for her. Fairytale was a bit wobbly.
There was a lot of separation. She'd be in London. Often he was down at Highgrove.
It's hard for people to imagine, who know her public persona of confidence, all those things that people saw in public, to realize that when she was in private, she was often in pieces.
She also imagined that every time he was gone, he was with Camilla. Sometimes that was maybe true and sometimes not, but she believed that her husband was always off with another woman. And it was devastating to her.
There was a lot of turmoil. Sunday nights when Charles and Diana would have a big fight, she would bolt the house, tears streaming down her face, and she would be taking William and Harry back into London with her.
Prince Charles doesn't like the fact that she's a superstar and he isn't. What has happened is there's been a transformation. She's become the person that everyone wants to know, everyone wants to meet. He has taken a back seat, and it's not enjoyable for him.
Part of the story of Diana is a real person with real emotions and feelings, and those emotions and feelings often being inconvenient or challenging, which is kind of what happens in a couple. But you have a man, Prince Charles, who is not used to the inconvenient emotion. He is used to concealing his emotions. Emotions just get him into trouble.
She wasn't stiff upper lippy at all. And that was the royal way. That wasn't Diana.
She was adored by the public and incredibly famous, and yet at home incredibly lonely and felt unloved by her husband. The way she expressed that loneliness was through binging and deprivation.
She spoke about not being comfortable in her own shell, about doubting who she was. She would go into the kitchen and eat pints of ice cream, and then she would be sick.
I knew about that syndrome because of being in the Royal Ballet and amongst dancers. And that syndrome, a lot of the time, would come in because they didn't feel they were going to live up to their parents' expectations of being a great dancer, or they didn't fit and they weren't going to get into a company. So then they would persecute themselves. With Diana, I think it was a cry for help.
I remember Diana at a fashion show. She looked painfully thin. You could feel the disintegration. You could feel the unhappiness.
I saw the bulimia as a manifestation of unhappiness, not as an illness per se. So if the unhappiness or the cause could get solved, then maybe it would back off. She wouldn't need it anymore. I think as she gathered steam in her own right and suddenly started to see what she could achieve, and the role became more defined, their life became more defined.
The stories were abound that Charles and Camilla were back together.
Diana decided that she was going to confront Camilla. And she did.
In history, royal people went around planting commemorative trees or launching ships or things like that. But the princess has taken up the cause of the deaf, of handicapped children, and that perhaps is something new to many people, that royal people should concern themselves in this way.
Diana did become very gripped very quickly by causes. She always said to me that she thought of herself as an outsider, that these people were also outsiders, and she had a bond with them. The idea that Diana was an outsider is, for me, quite hard to reconcile, because she was everything that is the establishment in some ways. But emotionally, she felt that she was an outsider. And that's what attracted her to a range of organizations where people were on the wrong side, as it were.
She resonated with suffering. She herself had scar tissue and traumas growing up. She was introverted and lonely, had insecurities. And so the accumulation of this, even after marrying the prince and becoming Princess Diana, all of that was combining into something quite powerful, which was this very raw, high emotional intelligence, social intelligence. I would call it trauma intelligence.
Well, how much do you sell them for?
£3.10 that one's going for.
Is that all? So I can knit a dishcloth only because it's square.
Oh.
You can't go wrong.
No. Lovely seeing you.
And how are you feeling?
Oh, I feel fine, thank you.
I'm learning how they cope and how they deal with the outside world who don't always want to know about them, perhaps.
As Diana grew into her role, she became patron of more and more charities. Things like addiction, homelessness, HIV, of course.
We're going to go on now with AIDS, because apparently a lot of health professionals are now worried about their own chance of getting AIDS. 1 in 4 would refuse to treat AIDS patients if given a choice.
We forget, because HIV is now a treatable disease, that in those days it was a death sentence. Okay.
I have lost a dozen friends already in the last year and a half, 2 years. I think in terms of the gay community, anybody who's got any brains is nervous and scared.
She had friends who were gay, who had either been infected by the virus or who somebody special to them had been. And this opened her eyes to the reality of it all. I think she just decided that she was going to do her bit for this.
Her visit to the Middlesex Hospital and its AIDS ward. All the speculation had centred on whether she would wear gloves when shaking hands with the staff and patients.
HIV does not make people dangerous to know. So you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
She shook hands with all the nurses, doctors, and all 10 patients on the ward. She clearly wasn't wearing gloves.
It got on the front page of every newspaper in England. It got in the glossy section of every magazine in Europe. It changed the conversation. It did move the needle because she was leveraging her celebrity on behalf of something that she cared about.
It sent an enormous message. They see that image of what the most famous woman in the world doing that. It was extraordinary. And I think she knew exactly what she was doing.
It was an incredibly powerful act. She was not really a gloves person. She was very about human contact and what really mattered. And what really mattered that day was to get across a very clear message that, you know, I'm going to touch this gentleman, and you can all exist in a community with people who are suffering, and we must help them.
kiss. One more kiss, please.
Nothing in her life came close to the love for her children. Diana always wanted to have a family. That was always her thing. She was the best mother ever.
Her really, really important time and the time she enjoyed most in her life was with William and Harry. She was so incredibly happy when she was with her boys.
You must remember that hanging over Diana always was her own upbringing. She wanted, as many children do who have difficult family backgrounds, she wanted her children's experience to be different. I think she thought that Charles had had rather a lonely upbringing. He'd been away to boarding school. It hadn't been a happy experience for him. He'd had a rather distant relationship with his father, and Diana didn't want that for her children.
Prince Charles, very traditional, and he probably introduced his sons to the opera and to fine paintings and great music. But Diana introduced him to McDonald's, going to the cinema, going to the fun fair, going to Disney World.
Diana was a different kind of mother than we've seen ever in the royal family. Hands-on, joyful, playful, and it's not so stuffy and hemmed in.
Diana insisted that they do things, for instance, visit the homeless, that would prepare them for their role ahead.
She felt it was very important that if this was the country that they were going to take over, that they should see the reality of the extremes. And living in a palace, it was just one end.
Diana wanted to give her children love. People go on and on about, oh, how she wanted to give them a normal life. Well, that was a sort of byproduct of love. She was keen to give them an inborn happiness and a strength moving forward.
Have a look through there. Look. Oh, look, see. Look through there. You see things going on.
For the young Prince William, it was an early introduction to life in the spotlight.
Finding that line between incredible fame and keeping your own privacy, that's a very, very difficult thing, especially when it comes to children.
The boys were going to become a focal point of the media because the eldest boy was going to become the freaking King of England.
When William and Harry were little, the British press just hounded them mercilessly. They didn't ask for this. There was just no way for her to control it once it started. She certainly hated that the media caused her children distress or in any way got in the way of her mothering.
I remember she was furious when she'd just taken Harry to school. He was very small, 4 or 5.
Here he is arriving at a school nativity play. Smile for the cameras, Harry. Lovely.
The English papers had taken pictures of him sticking his tongue out and said what a cheeky boy he was. But the photographers had been sticking their tongue out at Harry. And what 4 or 5-year-old boy doesn't stick his tongue out back if an adult's doing that to them? And it was this sheer dishonesty of it, that they were trying to say he was this impossibly rude little kid, whereas they had actually provoked it on purpose. Diana felt furious about that.
For the children, it was really horrible. You know, that's probably where it was the most heartbreaking for her.
I think you did always see Diana very carefully try and guard against the prying eyes of any kind of press when it came to her children. I'll never forget her on a ski slope with her kids.
Seen the kid? Is she back of the queue or front?
The photographers that were trying to get those, you know, offbeat pictures would go to great lengths. Because you don't care about her emotions, do you? You don't care. All you care about is the picture you're taking. You're not thinking about, is this making her upset? Is this upsetting the children? You're just taking the pictures because you want to get a good picture, because you want to sell it for a lot of money.
That's a nice one, strong picture, wasn't it?
She would say to me, photographers have been chasing them, and that really upset her. She'd had enough of the invasion with the children.
If one of those guys gets a picture that somebody else doesn't get, $500,000. You don't need to be like from a magazine. You don't need to be on assignment. You don't need to have the best camera. You are a millionaire. And so they're all out there. We'll just never stop looking. We'll never stop taking pictures, and we'll get it.
She'd been putting up with scrutiny for a long period now. Diana was older, wiser, and she got more confident. That took some guts.
Diana was always incredibly brave. When we stayed up with my mother in Scotland, we used to go out lobster potting, you know, put lobster pots down and try and catch lobsters. I remember once we pulled one up and there was a massive eel in it, I mean, a really massive conger eel. And it had teeth very, very long, and it was flapping around the boat. Horrible, you know, this thing thrashing around was really a creature from the deep. And Diana just got a penknife out and just dealt with it. You know, it was hand to hand, and she just got stuck in. That was a strong girl who was brave. She was not a pushover. Never, ever. Goodness, it was a ridiculous concept.
What about this relationship with Charles? I mean, are they okay again?
There's a married lady whose husband is a brigadier called Camilla Parker Bowles, who's been friendly with Charles for 20 years. He spends a lot of time with her, but I'm sure it's all a matter of the meeting of minds rather than bodies.
The stories were abound that Charles and Camilla were back together. And I was asked to go and do a private party photographs and was told that there'd be some special guests there. And the special guests were Charles and Camilla. This is the biggest story, and I'm taking pictures of them dancing, and I can't tell anyone and I can't issue them. It was like being given the biggest box of chocolates in the world and you can't have one.
I think he married a girl who he thought would be very compliant, very easy to control.
Until Princess Diana came along, for the past century and a half, when royal couples were unhappy with each other, they just stuck it out. That was the way it was. You led separate lives, you saw each other on public occasions, but that was it. Princess Diana, amazingly, decided that that wasn't it for her, that she simply couldn't live a lie.
Camilla and her sister Annabelle were having a big party. Diana and Charles were invited. On that evening, Diana decided that she was going to confront Camilla. And she did.
I don't think you can measure what a seismic shift that was in the nature of the monarchy.
I'm explaining. Yes, let me just carry on. Let me carry on for a second. Let me carry on. You ask the question. You ask the question. I'll give the answer. The question. No, you've got to let me finish. You've got to let me finish.
You've referred to your paper as the paper which campaigns for your right to know, the reader's right to know. Right to know what? Is there some line to be drawn? Is there some domain of privacy into which even the Sun and its readers should not intrude? Is there a complementary right on the part of the ordinary citizen, complementary to his right to know, his right to be let alone?
I think that's an interesting question. I think it's not an easy answer.
When I started my public life, I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
Every breath you take, every move you make.
But I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become.
The media and Diana needed each other. They fed off of each other. She was very good at dealing with it, at times manipulating it.
You can't use that and it not come back to haunt you.
This was like a dam on a river.
It was suddenly cracking.
Something that controlled a huge amount of power.
It just blew open.
Britain had lost its collective sanity.
She was figuring out celebrity on the job. She tried to make something of it. She tried to do something valuable.
In the ashes of her marriage, she succeeded in creating herself as a brand, the people's princess.
It's possible to put up with a very difficult situation and create a pretty lively life.
When the announcement came, I was in disbelief. I couldn't take it in.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has been seriously injured.
Every proprietor and editor has blood on his hands today.
Princess Di is dead. And who should we see about that?
How can this happen? We're in the middle of the story.
A
lot of us had known already that Prince Charles was in love with somebody else and had been sort of almost all his life.
They were certainly deeply fond of each other, Charles and Camilla, and they thought as long as we keep our heads down a bit, we can occasionally go on holiday together.
He really found a soulmate. They share a lot more in common. Their passions are more similar and aligned. Camilla is happy to be more private and doesn't need to be a star on a stage.
By 1986, Diana knew very well what was going on.
You could see it in the images. That was the other thing that was so transfixing about her. You could tell in the pictures how they were getting along.
When she realized it was serious, it must have been quite a jolt, you know, very upsetting.
The public view was here was a happy lady having a great time and really enjoying her life. And there was a big vacuum around her life. She was very unhappy.
Throughout history, it would come as no surprise that men have often felt that they were entitled to have a mistress on the side. It wasn't just the men. It was generally accepted among the wives that they had to produce an heir and a spare, and then they could take a lover themselves. That's the way it goes.
Once Diana decided to seek love outside the marriage, it is completely unsurprising that one of the first men was Barry Manicky, who was her bodyguard. Someone whose literal job it was to protect her. She felt very safe with him.
Charles and Diana were on a private plane to the Cannes Film Festival in 1987. Before they got on board, Charles got word that Barry Manicky had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And he had to break the news to her. She was in floods of tears, and her lady-in-waiting was trying to console her, but nothing seemed to work.
She wanted somebody to just love her. She sought to be loved unconditionally.
James Hewitt was a very significant relationship for her. If she had not married Prince Charles, James Hewitt might have been the guy that she married. She and Charles were apart so often that James Hewitt was there with her boys, and her boys grew to like him a lot. He got transferred to Germany, and then that was the end of that.
The pattern of Diana's later years, with really quite multiple male partners, is an argument for those who would say that it wasn't necessarily Charles's fault. I'm not suggesting she was promiscuous. In fact, on the contrary, I don't think she was looking for sex with these men. She was looking for love.
She spent time with people, but they weren't people that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Really, deep down in her heart, it was Charles.
Diana was at the 40th birthday party of Camilla's sister. Diana uses that occasion to confront Camilla face to face about what's been going on and said, in a nutshell, "Don't make an idiot of me."
She simply couldn't live a lie. I don't think you can quantify what a seismic shift that was in the nature of the monarchy.
It was a scene in their inner circle. It exposed that Camilla and Charles were having an affair. Even some of the editors in the press were aware of it.
Our feature writer, Judy Wade, she was the first to really spot that this relationship was in a bad way. She said, no, I saw the hands part, I saw her look, I think there's something wrong. With all these competing newspapers, there's always been intense competition. And they had to obviously get contacts within the palace, they had to have sources, and untold amounts of money would exchange hands.
They're paying butlers, they're paying flatmates, they're paying delivery guys, they're posing as some of these people.
I think you would get a bit paranoid. Who's going to deceive me next? You know, there'd be deceit all around. Could you trust anybody?
She was pried upon, and she needed some privacy, and she didn't get a lot of privacy.
That's a pretty vulnerable place to be. It's like discovering, the room's been tapped. She was concerned that somebody was listening within Kensington Palace switchboard, so that was her worry. When we started using scramblers, we switched it on and it would garble the message. We would often get a minute of chat on the scramblers, which the opposition would hear as it was a garbled speech, and then the line would be cut. That was pretty sobering.
She was just getting slightly paranoid about the whole thing. Quite rightly so, when you've got so much going on around you.
She knew there was going to be an explosion. It was becoming inevitable that something was going to come out. The whole marriage being a disaster and so on. It was going to happen. And her huge concern was her two boys. As the boys were the heirs to the institution might step in and say, we'll take on from here.
They were not just her sons, they were heirs and spares to the throne.
She could have been sidelined, and I think that would have been a disaster. So what she needed was first paint on the canvas. She needed to have her case heard. She wanted to tell the world.
There was a kind of fear in her, and the fear turned into rebellion and strength by letting the world know what was going on from her point of view.
And she spotted Andrew Morton. He was easy to spot. He was tall and handsome.
Andrew Morton, he had covered her before, and he had covered her in a kind and compassionate way, and she appreciated that. And so she gravitated toward him.
He was already doing a biog on her. Diana said maybe she should help with Morton and the book.
She wasn't prepared to rely on people like me to tell her story, or her friends, or tabloid reporters. She wanted to speak to the nation herself.
I said, well, you can't be interviewed by him, or you'll be in a vulnerable position. Think very long and hard about what you really want to do, and make sure that you don't do any damage to the organization that your boys will end up as part of.
It was a top secret project of Diana's. Charles had no clue about this, none. It was a very deliberate procedure. Morton would figure out what he wanted. He would write the questions. He would give them to James Colthurst.
I would receive the questions. I turned up and she'd grab all the questions out of my hand and just sat there. It's quicker if I read them and answer them there and then. And she opened up. Then I'd go back and then I'd hand over the tape. I think she was just relieved that she was going to be heard for the first time and perhaps understood.
When Princess Diana married Prince Charles, she was expected to be involved, but she wasn't expected to be independent. And that is the key difference.
Just before the Andrew Morton book was coming out, she started to be quite edgy and distressed. She knew the world was about to fall in on her head.
She was eager to take part in trying to control her own narrative, and it blew up in her face.
The first excerpt of the book occurred in June of 1992. Charles and Diana were at Highgrove for the weekend, and they were entertaining Charles's interior designer, Robert Keim, who was sitting at the breakfast table, and somebody delivered a fax which had the first installment of this book and gave it to Charles. And Robert Keim watched him reading this and saw this look of alarm on Charles's face that this was going to be in the Sunday Times that day. And it rocked the royal family.
It absolutely was unprecedented. It was just not done.
The papers this morning are headlining the gossip that Princess Diana has attempted suicide 5 times.
The book paints a depressing picture of a couple at war with one another. Princess is said to have given tacit cooperation and personal photographs. Buckingham Palace denied she cooperated with the author in any way.
The revelations were shocking. The bulimia and the affairs.
On the other hand, you had a lot of people being very sympathetic because it made her real.
She's brought something out into the open that hasn't been talked about before.
She took the stigma away from people dealing with eating disorders, which was an incredibly powerful message.
It made us realize that she had the same problems that everyone else does.
The public were very sympathetic to her, particularly females.
Diana had a huge impact on people who went through all sorts of battles emotionally. They really connected with her and all she went through.
Finally, she was on a path that was self-directed. And that's really what feminism is all about, is finding one's inner path and then acting on it.
Once the letters started piling in, suddenly she realized that she'd touched a lot of people. The letters meant a great deal to her. The theme was gratitude.
Well, I've always liked Diana very much, for her honesty and for all the things she had to go through.
But I think Diana should be queen. She's very much a contemporary woman, and I think we all admire her.
She was eager to take part in trying to control her own narrative, and she saw the Morton book as a way of doing just that. And it blew up in her face.
She was very good at times dealing with the media, sometimes manipulating the media. But once you've made your life a commodity, you really don't have any control over it.
All of a sudden, 2 surreptitiously recorded phone conversations come to light.
It's just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture.
It was New Year's Eve, and Diana and her then lover, James Gilby, were having a phone conversation. I don't sense that it was a terribly serious relationship, but the tenor of the conversation was one that transmitted intimacy, the use of nicknames like Squidgy.
Squidgy, kiss me, oh, God. I love it. I love it.
Unbeknownst to James Gilby and Diana, that telephone call had been tapped. And somebody had a recording of it that made its way into the offices of a tabloid newspaper.
It's two people talking about, being in love. One of them happens to be the Princess of Wales. One of them is not Prince Charles. So that's bad. But it's going to get worse.
Meanwhile, a conversation between Charles and Camilla on the telephone was illegally tapped.
I can't start the week without you. But I feel I feel bad. Yes, you do. How do you do? Yeah.
Prince Charles was going to become the King of England. That is the King of England we're talking about.
Bits and pieces began to appear in Australian media.
Who leaked those tapes?
What was the need for the public to know, which is what public interest in my view.
What you're trying to do is to explain what you think is news. Yes, you are. To every single person. Oh, well, hold on. Well, let me respond to him. Joe, you've had your go.
Kelvin Mackenzie was editor of The Sun, and in some ways he was the perfect embodiment of what a tabloid editor should be. He was tough, he was over the top. The fact that it may involve people's lives being upended, not his problem.
The single word that would describe him would be iconoclast. There have been various other epithets ever since.
I frankly believe you're hostile to the press and you're hostile to ordinary people knowing the truth about what goes on in public life.
But I have to say that your somewhat offensive and aggressive manner does not help us in coming down on your side.
Apart from MPs, I don't know anybody who's ever worried about the press. What they do worry about is what's going on in high places, and they want papers like The Sun to expose them.
Both sets of tapes were horribly uncomfortable, really.
The release of those tapes was the most dreadful breach of press protocol and basic morality and decency.
This was to transform how everyone would be treated. All celebrities. The level of intrusion was crafted during the Diana years.
This was like a dam on a river. This was something that controlled a huge amount of power.
Bits and pieces began to appear in Australian media.
An Australian magazine has published what it alleges is an explicit telephone call between Prince Charles.
An Australian magazine tonight published what it claims is the uncensored transcript.
And there are always these questions of how it emerged there.
Who leaked those tapes?
The Australian magazine New Idea won't say how it got the tape, but believes it is authentic. The magazine is owned by Rupert Murdoch, whose British newspapers include The Times and The Sun.
The Sun published a fresh scandal, this time involving Diana.
Mr. Murdoch today denied he'd known of the decision to publish.
The paper then invited the whole country to listen in at any telephone.
Listen to the conversation and judge for yourself.
What did your proprietor or whoever engaged you?
Yes, Mr. Murdoch hired me, yes. Rupert Murdoch plays a tremendous amount of interest in what happens in this country.
Has Mr. Murdoch ever discussed with you the paper's policy towards the monarchy and the royal family?
Diana was a pawn in a larger chess game. It was Murdoch and the Sun versus the royal family.
You can't tell the story of the evolution of the media and journalism in the English-speaking world without focusing on Rupert Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch buying the News of the World in '68 and then The Sun in 1969 was a major turning point in the history of British newspapers.
One more link in the vast chain of a rapidly expanding empire.
As an Australian, he had less of an affection for the royal family, didn't see the point of them.
You would never really open up to society until you tackled this class system, and it was very hard to see how you could tackle it with the royal family then.
He saw them as fodder. I mean, they provided an unbelievable amount of grist for his publications.
Previously, editors had decided what should go into their newspapers by asserting their own values, their own ethics, their own standards. Murdoch came along and said, I'm not interested in that. What I want is simply to give the people what they want. How will I find that out? 1970, let's put a naked girl into the newspaper. Is that popular? Yes, it is. Right. That was the foundation, the birth of what became known as the Page 3 girl.
The Page 3 girls of The Sun was a perfect example of a newspaper that demanded to be in some ways taken seriously, nonetheless reducing women to body parts. Diana was equally reduced to her looks, to her figure. Rupert Murdoch decided this is one of the great narratives we're going to ride, and we're going to ride this for years. Could they find a way to get her in a bathing suit? You know, if they saw the royal bum, would that go on pages?
Princess Diana was like fresh meat.
Give the people what they want. It was as simple as that.
The more beautiful she became, the more people really liked to try to humiliate her.
The British public was certainly getting very disturbed by what Diana was being put through. They still bought the magazines, they still bought the newspapers.
After a while, they forgot that this was a real person and they just saw her as a commodity.
The revolution begins here. MSNBC.
There was this explosion of cable channels.
She was like a catalyst for that industry.
The princess has blabbed to the tab.
Diana became the most fascinating woman in the world at the same time that 24-hour news was becoming part of our lives.
So what are you going to do to fill that? Well, the tabloids go crazy.
Plus, we'll reveal her words about JFK Jr.
And it's being called news.
The institution itself may be doomed.
Not because there's something inherently newsworthy in what's going on. It's because the public wants to read about it.
Suddenly, newspapers have real competition on a daily basis. That makes them more desperate. TV was now a real threat to their existence.
Do you realise she's on holiday, been chasing around and getting pictures?
Well, it has its compensations.
Is there anything you wouldn't do to get a photograph?
Not really. I don't think there is anything. I don't think there should be anything to stop you getting pictures. So the best thing is to go through with it brazenly, and then at least you've upset them for something at the end of it.
The global appetite for paparazzi photos made everybody a paparazzo. It became clear to people in Diana's gym, oh, here she is working out. I'm going to try to get a photo and sell it.
They were allegedly taken without her knowledge.
Newspapers were saying, well, it's not us. But actually, the British newspapers were probably worse than the foreign paparazzi. They were paying these paparazzis vast amounts of money.
She must have felt so violated. It was coming at her from all angles.
One of the great betrayals was when James Hewitt ultimately sold his story.
Princess in Love, written with the cooperation of Major Hewitt, hit the shelves.
She was crushed.
She was feeling under siege.
They'd be screaming, Diana, look here, and so on. But they would say worse things than that, to provoke some kind of reaction which would make a worthwhile picture. Diana, aren't you ashamed of yourself? Diana, what do you think of Camilla now? What do you think he does in bed with her that he didn't do for you? All sorts of stuff. Who are you now? I don't think that Rupert Murdoch would have been certainly knowledgeable about all the illicit activity that went on, but he created the culture in which what we did to Diana could occur.
Ma'am, do you play golf as well as tennis? You can get a hole-in-one with this lot.
I have been the editor of The Sun for 12 years. Right now, the press is at its best behaved. I would say it's better behaved now than at any time that I can remember.
Just give me one picture, mate, and I'll go, all right?
People like what we do. They don't look upon it in the way you look upon it. The way our readers look upon it, they pick it up and say, "It's incredible. Isn't this fantastic?"
Out. O-U-T, out.
Have a nice trip now.
In some ways, Diana serves as a rebuke to the idea that journalists are going to adhere to a higher principle. Diana wasn't a thing, she was a person, and they treated her as an object.
There can't be any doubt that we overstepped the mark. We lost any sense of ethics here. We thought here was somebody who had privilege and really sacrificed her rights to privacy by simply having the privilege that she did.
Kensington Palace. The Prince and Princess of Wales slept there overnight, but it's believed in separate suites at either end.
The Prince and Princess of Wales have begun a 4-day tour of South Korea. The visit is seen as an important step in promoting trade with Britain, but they were unable to avoid continuing speculation about the state of their marriage.
Clear things were going wrong, the Queen and Prince Philip actually convened a sort of family counselling session in which they sat down with Diana and Charles and said, "Come on, let's talk about this. Can we help you in some way?" And Charles said, "What? You want me to talk about what I'm really feeling? So I'll see it tomorrow morning on the front page of the papers?" And looked at Diana. Diana broke down in tears, and that was that.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Both the Prince and Princess have made it clear they have no plans to divorce.
The separation was a surprise and a shock for the British people when it was announced by John Major in Parliament. And that shows how important the royal marriage was. It was a major moment in British history.
Her Majesty and His Royal Highness particularly hope that the intrusions into the privacy of the Prince and Princess may now cease.
The reality of separation was very tough. She was really miserable.
And that led to her deciding to withdraw completely from public life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales.
Over the next few months, I will be seeking a more suitable way of combining a meaningful public role with, hopefully, a more private life.
In what was an emotional address, the princess had effectively bowed out of most of her public work for the foreseeable future.
She became increasingly fed up with it. She just felt it. They'd had their pound of flesh.
Of course, then we had, the event that in my eyes was the start of the detonation of the Diana bomb. And that was the documentary that was made by Jonathan Dimbleby about the Prince of Wales.
The whole idea of it was to show him in a better light, but it had quite the opposite effect.
Did you try to be faithful and honorable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down.
This makes Princess Diana think, I need to have a voice again.
I think if she wanted to even some scores, she was savvy enough to know how to use the media to do that too.
She was due to attend an art gallery. She stopped the car about 100 meters away and strolled straight toward the cameras looking like $1 million.
Princess Diana used fashion as an extremely efficient weapon. People were falling over themselves to take pictures.
You knew the next day the story was going to be about Charles and the adultery, but the picture on page 1 was going to be Diana, and it was.
She saw it as kind of a war for public acceptance.
People could not get enough of Princess Diana. She knew it, and she knew how to use that.
When her marriage began to fall apart, she did an expert job in terms of using the media to her advantage, playing the system, because she was nimble and she was young and she was often 2 steps ahead of the palace. And this was her secret weapon. This was the biggest weapon she ever used.
She had to go through a lot of subterfuge to make the show. Cameras were sneaked into the palace. She didn't tell any members of her staff until almost the eve of broadcast. I think it's indicative of how she felt, again, that she couldn't trust many people.
Martin Bashir really got Diana's confidence. And so she wanted to put her side across, which she did big time.
Well, that was the most brilliant interview, the most riveting television I'll ever watch in my whole life. It was treacherous, I thought.
I don't think many people would want me to be Queen. Actually, when I say many people, I mean the establishment that I'm married into, because they've decided that I'm a non-starter.
You know, when you look at why did she do these things, you have to see the circumstances. Whether she was right or wrong in these decisions, you know, she felt really in a tight spot.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
You didn't have to see Panorama to know what was said, because it was in every national newspaper all around the world. And so I couldn't avoid it. I just couldn't believe it.
Did your relationship go beyond a close friendship?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Were you unfaithful?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him. But I was very let down.
But she's talking about eating disorders and postpartum depression and feeling isolated and alone. Like, people didn't talk about that stuff in 1995. We barely talk about it now.
The Panorama interview was finally one step too far for the Queen. Obviously, the Queen was angry, and obviously she felt it personally. I mean, looking back on it, what everybody was trying to do was clearly delusional. And in that sense, the Panorama broadcast brought the delusion to an end. That was the moment when Diana had to properly start to be de-royaled.
We're turning down Gloucester Road. Di and the kids. I think it looks like the Harbour Club.
All right, get over on the grass there. Can you get over there? Give us some space.
Traditionally, if you're not royal blood, you know, you're not protected once you leave the womb, so to speak. And I just thought, well, how's she going to survive?
She is now an ex-member of the royal family. And police decided that she didn't need cover.
It became guerrilla. It was almost like warfare.
I remember she was pictured going to, I think it was a bookshop. She'd managed to cast off everyone, but one photographer had spotted her. This photographer literally stood there, clack, 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 clack. And you think to yourself, you know, he must realize that that's an awful thing to do, right in her face, right up close.
That was what people wanted. They were tired of the fake, all glossied up, beautiful shot. They wanted to see reality. They wanted to see them in their day-to-day activity. That was going to be the way that we were going to see celebrities in the future.
I feel like we're all like complicit in some way, because, you know, if no one bought those magazines or no one clicked on those pictures, they wouldn't sell, but we do. We all do.
I'd had enough of it, and you know, I can see how she'd had enough of it. I'd actually had enough of it, and I thought, you know what? I don't want to do this job anymore. It's not nice. It's not pleasant. One of my colleagues that I travelled with all the time, she kept saying, I can't, what is wrong with you? Why won't you come? Or you're going to miss her with the landmines. You're going to miss, she's going to go to Angola. And I was like, I'm not coming. I don't want to come. At that point, I felt a huge relief walking away from it. So if I felt like that, how do you think she felt?
I'd have hated to be in her position. Every single thing that she did was, followed and documented. And, she was never kind of out of the spotlight. But I also saw the way that she used it.
The thing is, Francois, I have all this media interest.
Yeah.
So let's take it somewhere where they can be positive and raise a situation which is distressing like this.
Yeah.
I went there thinking it's not going to be a serious trip. And actually, the trip turned out to be really quite different. Because of what I do, I was kind of used to seeing things like that. But even so, it was shocking.
So she lost the child.
She could smell in a room and feel who was suffering most, who was most depressed or suicidal, who was most injured. And she attracted like a magnet those people to her.
Don't her friends help her?
Those of us who worked with the princess in 1997 had the privilege of seeing her at her best. This is her calling the shots and coming into her power and exercising it.
She did this famous walk through the minefield, which, we were all kind of, was she really going to do it? And she was walking through along this path, but there were mines either side. And at the end of it, some of the journalists, jokingly, I think, was saying to her, we didn't get good pictures, do it again. And she did. I thought, it's nerve-wracking to walk through a minefield, so to do it for a second time. But she knew what those pictures would mean. Some people didn't like it. I mean, there was criticism of her by some government ministers.
Now, the government minister's home has said you're a loose cannon by supporting this campaign. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, Jenny, I'm only trying to highlight a problem that's going on all around the world. That's all.
It's okay. So that was...
Oh, I really make you burst into tears now.
Don't worry.
Who said I'm a loose cannon?
She wanted to bring attention and, there's not much the government could do about it. She commanded way more attention than any government minister in Britain.
I had the privilege of working with leaders all around the world. I've never experienced this charismatic light energetically coming off of someone and actually changing things. When we moved to negotiate the landmine ban treaty, the media was on the issue, and it helped us make sure that the treaty included provisions for the victims. It was the first arms control treaty to have humanitarian provisions. That's because of the Princess of Wales.
And in that way, she did presage, to some degree, people like George Clooney, Angelina Jolie, maybe even Bono, showing you how you could take that celebrity, and so long as you knew where the cameras were and knew how to focus attention and knew what you were talking about, you could do good.
I think, like everybody who lives through
a moment of horror or great tragedy, you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing.
She didn't become famous because there's nothing else to talk about. She continued to become famous because she was freaking Diana. Now she was free. Now who's next? And that is a great storyline. Who will be with Diana? Just like it used to be who will be with Charles.
It was very, very difficult for Diana to date. And she once said to me, Lana, who on earth would take me on? Everywhere she went, they were following her. Whatever she did, it was just so hard for her.
Diana became besotted with a Pakistani heart surgeon named Hasnat Khan. And they had a romance that was very much behind the scenes. And she felt that he understood her. She admired his humanitarian work. She wished she could be somebody like Hasnat Khan who would save lives.
Finding a partner in life who could deal with Diana and everything that went with it was an incredibly complicated endeavor. And she was in love with Dr. Khan. He did not like the spotlight at all. That was not appealing to him. And so, of course, the relationship didn't work out. It was devastating to her. When Dodi Fayed entered her life, she found someone who did like the spotlight, who didn't mind dealing with that. She also found someone who had the financial means to take care of her and get her on the private jets and hire the security that was necessary and to buy her some privacy. In a lot of ways, she probably saw him as, you know, her Aristotle Onassis.
I found, especially in the last year, she was a very exciting woman, more relaxed and more without the cloth over her. She was happy to get on with her life.
I think she just grew into herself. I thought it was great actually watching someone blossom.
She made a plan of what the future was going to be for her in life. I don't think she was serious about Dodi, which I think she was having a good laugh as well, you know. But she needed the protection.
The Fayeds, they were able to take things forward and look after her themselves with their own security. But I'm sure that they could not have been prepared for the enormity of the interest on Princess Diana and their son.
What struck me about Dodi and Diana was they had this 6-week relationship, really, that began in the middle of July of 1997. And it really wasn't until early August that the press caught on to the fact that Dodi and Diana were having a romance. And then they really went to town. I mean, they covered them relentlessly. They took all sorts of pictures of them lounging about together on various Fayed yachts. They were in hot pursuit, kind of 24/7, because it was an exotic relationship.
The hunters were coming from overseas too, so it really became a frenzy. And that was a sadness. But then, you know, there were times, as people said, you know, on the yacht, she seemed to be taunting them almost.
They were in the south of France in the last week of August. On a whim, they decided they would instead go to Paris and spend the night. Diana's children, William and Harry, were still up at Balmoral, so she would be going back to an empty house. So why not?
She rang the office and spoke to me and said, "It's a waste of time me coming back." And I said, "No, there's not a problem, Mum. You just, I'll be standing by from now until whenever."
Late that night of August 30th, that Dodi came up with a plan to evade the paparazzi. The paparazzi were a little bit smarter than Dodi, and they were lying in wait behind the Ritz.
You can't protect someone all the time. You know, I mean, you just can't. You never know when they're going to pop up. Close protection officers are one thing, but paparazzi on, you know, really fast motorbikes are something else.
was about 12:30 at night, and get a call from the office saying Diana is in a car crash in Paris. Could I catch the first flight in the morning?
The phone went, and my wife answered the phone, and this is 1 o'clock in the morning, you know. This is one of the policemen in Balmoral ringing me. He said, well, ask Colin to get up, sit on the end of the bed, and listen to me. He said, Colin, your boss is injured. She's had a road accident. And I said, oh, thank you very much. Could you tell me the injuries? He said, no, I think an arm, leg, and a few other cuts and bruises. That's, if you read the case, that's what happened. They thought she was injured.
This is a special report from ABC News.
Good evening, I'm Kevin Newman. There has been a terrible accident involving Diana, the Princess of Wales, in Paris.
The next phone call was from the private secretary, get down here.
She is now said to be in intensive care at
These
LaSalle.
garbled reports were coming through. Dodie was badly injured. Diana was on a life support machine or something.
We don't know precisely her condition at this hour. We have had reports that she has a concussion at least.
Sometime after midnight, local time, where they were involved in some kind of collision. We don't know with what, but we do know what the consequence was, and that was that the car rolled over, ended up on its roof.
Speculation is growing that it will be grim news.
And then about an hour after that, the office rang and said, look, we've chartered a plane out of Heathrow, go straight to Heathrow now. And I literally dropped my wife at home, grabbed my cameras.
I think it was something like 3 o'clock, 3:30. Michael Gibbons stood in front of us and said, she's dead. Just like that, she's dead. You know, there was, you said, what do you mean dead? They're talking about this guy on the television behind you is telling us that she's injured.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has been seriously injured in a car accident in Paris.
Well, I'm worried by the lack of any news or the lack of any statement. One wonders if one is being told the whole truth at the moment.
Stephen, I have to interrupt there because within the last few moments, the Press Association in Britain, citing unnamed British sources, has reported that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. This is not yet confirmed by any official source.
And the first thing he said, right, Colin, would you go to Paris and act for me? And my wife very kindly managed to get us on the 2 seats on the first plane out, which was full of press, totally full. The Prince of Wales' police officer who was travelling to Paris had to sit in the jump seat and in the front. You know, it was packed solid.
As I landed in Paris, the office rang and said that she's dead. 4:30, I remember landing at Le Bourget Airport. Phone rang, and there was a few other members of the press on the plane. I said Diana's dead. Oh.
I went into the hospital, and it was chaotic, really. There was a lot of people around. I walked down the corridor to the room where the princess was. She was in a bed, ordinary bedding, covered up to here. Massive great window to the left. And I could see very quickly that people were on the roof of quite a distance away and may not have yet pinpointed the room that we were in. Meanwhile, I was discussing to get some blankets to put up to the windows, which we did, so the press couldn't see in.
I was living in South Africa at the time, and my 4 kids lived with me. They were very young. I said to the kids, I'm afraid Aunt Diana's died. Eliza. I remember her looking at me with a little smile, and she went, but not in real life, Daddy. She thought it was such a terrible story that it must be a fairy tale or something, so. And that was very sad, yeah.
The Prince came up to me and said, "Colin, thank you very much for coming and what you've done. You will be coming back on the plane." And I always remember Lady Sarah McCorkadale saying, "I think we'll have a very quiet, private funeral, Colin." I don't know whether you've ever come into a street where you can't move with people. But as we came out of the airport and turned left, which is the A40 into London, no cars, people. People upon people upon people, all the way in. Must have been probably 4 or 5 miles.
I was so in shock that I just went back to bed and just sort of became comatose again. I couldn't deal with it. I just went back to bed, numb.
I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. It felt like my heart had been ripped out.
Disbelief that anything so awful could happen to her. It was, you know, it was shock. I mean, literally, it was shock.
A sad, sad loss. It's just a tragedy.
We'll miss her a lot. Didn't even realize it until it really happened.
How can this happen? Like we're in the middle of the story.
It was someone that had been cut down in the prime of her life when we thought that actually she was coming to a happier place.
She was the most famous woman in the world, and she was killed at 36 in a car crash, being chased by a horde of paparazzi in a tunnel with a drunk driver at the wheel, and her seatbelt not on.
Well, what could I have done? But you always think, God, I wish I could have protected her or whatever. But, you know, it was just, it was devastating. She was only granted half a life.
I think we were all mourning together. Like the tragic nature of that fairy tale just imploding.
The Russian President, Boris Yeltsin, said Princess Diana was well known and loved by the Russians.
I was tremendously impressed by her.
Let me say again how very sad Hillary and I are about the terrible accident that has taken the life of Princess Diana.
This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. I was furious, I wasn't just angry.
I photographed the coffin leaving and then get a cab to get back to the hotel to process the film. And the cab wouldn't take me. He said, "No, you're an assassin." By this time, it had come out that paparazzi were chasing the car, and everybody then thought that was the reason she died.
I just thought, I said, this is how it ends, you know? This terrible story of manipulation and gross unkindness sort of made terrible sense to me, that this is always how it was going to be. Something terrible would happen because of this absolute, endless hunger for more of a pound of flesh from Diana.
You that killed her. You, press that killed her. You're the scum.
Yes. No, this is death. Why you get harassing anybody here? They're just standing here. Horrible. They're just horrible. Good gracious.
Why were the paparazzi after them? If there was no money in the photographs, they wouldn't have been after her in the tunnel.
You know, what happened in France was unforgivable and horrendously sad.
They've taken her life. They've taken her life. I'm sorry. I blame the Sun newspaper and the ilk. They killed Diana.
Because she was chased in that tunnel by photographers, that we in the media, there was absolutely a sense of responsibility for her death. It was a moment of soul searching, no doubt. It still is.
I'm standing in Hyde Park now with millions of people. Yes, we are slightly to blame because we buy the papers that you print, so... But it's tragedy, really.
Hi, thanks for coming out. Princess Di is dead, and who should we see about that? The driver of the car, the paparazzis, or the magazines and papers who purchase these pictures and make bounty hunters out of photographers?
When you have a shock, you want somebody to blame. And the newspapers were terrified. And so I believe there was a calculated push by the tabloid newspapers to redirect public anger away from them and towards the monarchy.
The main attitude was, it wasn't us, it wasn't our fault. The driver was drunk, and it's all down to him. They quickly realized attack is always better than defense in terms of how newspapers organize themselves. So they were the first to highlight that the Queen had been slow to react in a way that they thought was appropriate.
I think there was an element of the press deliberately diverting attention away from themselves, but the behavior of the royal family didn't help.
I think our Queen should be here in London with her people. This is her nation, and they should know how all her people feel about Diana.
And one day, 2 days, 3 days, days go by and there isn't a word from the royal family. It was astonishing.
I think they treated her terrible, absolutely shocking. I don't think they're the most cold people on this earth.
What the world wanted was for the Queen and the royal family to come rushing down to London. There was this strange feeling that the Queen could act as some sort of balm, a consoling mother, that if she were in London, everybody would feel better.
A great many people have waited this week with enormous anticipation for the royal family to become engaged. And then the Queen came back yesterday.
This family that was grieving and that was in shock itself was forced to perform in public in order to save itself.
This week at Balmoral, we have all been trying to help William and Harry come to terms with the devastating loss that they and the rest of us have suffered.
When you listen to it, you suddenly realize, yes, this woman is not just the Queen, she's the grandmother of those boys. They were worried about people shouting, people jeering, and in fact, quite the opposite proved to be the case. The child held out flowers. You know, that's one of those minutes when humanity comes true, because it was unrehearsed. And she genuinely thought, sorry, I'm getting moved about this, but the flowers were being given to her to lay, to lay down for Diana. And she said, so shall I, you want me to lay the flowers for Diana? And the little girl memories of no, they're for you. And, I think that's the moment, as you can see from my reaction. That was the moment when it turned.
Being here in front of Westminster Abbey is an extraordinary experience. Behind me are thousands of people. They began to line up yesterday and even some the day before.
I think as a family, we wanted to reclaim her and give her peace. And so we were hoping for a small funeral here to start with. But then it became clear that that was actually not appropriate because, you know, the people had a right to say goodbye.
I remember people setting their alarm clocks to get up to watch her get married. Her death was, you know, not just a huge event as the marriage was. It was such tragedy.
People were grabbing at me and clinging to me and went, oh, because I knew her and I touched her in person, they thought they would get a bit of her by touching me. That's how powerful it all was.
The middle of London was like a graveyard. There was no traffic, nothing. Except the people going to the funeral. There was nothing. It was like a nuclear explosion had gone off, which it had in a way.
Right in front of Buckingham Palace, the Queen bows her head.
I felt at the time of her funeral that I had the absolute duty to just remind people that she'd had to put up with a lot of rubbish from the newspapers over here. And they didn't like hearing it, but you know what? They had to hear it.
I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age.
The thing that I was impressed most by, and I'll never forget, was when Spencer gave his speech about Diana, which was so incredibly to the point, without overdoing it or overemphasizing it, just factual, and suddenly I'm going to burst into
Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman. I'm so proud to be able to call my sister the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
You could have heard a pin drop as he spoke. Then what I heard was rain or autumn leaves rustling around. As we now know, it was clapping starting in the parks and along the streets. And that clapping came closer and closer, and it literally started at the top end of the Abbey and rippled down through the congregation. 99% of the people in there, including her sons, joined in. And it was the most amazing moment, really. It was, that sound is something that I'll never forget.
By far the hardest part of that day was not delivering my speech, but it was walking behind my sister's coffin with her sons. Particularly in those days, Harry was this tiny little thing. And I was just so worried, you know, what a trauma for a little chap to walk behind his mum's body. It's just awful. And I just thought, goodness, I hope they can get through this, you know. And I was amazed they did so well. I mean, really incredible. I love seeing the sort of uncomplicated way in which they deal with people and put them at their ease. It's so easy to connect the dots between them and their mother.
She was a victim of circumstance, but the Diana story isn't about victimhood. It's really about redemption.
Diana was a pioneer in terms of how she thought she could use her profile to make the world a better place.
And therefore, I hope you'll understand why I wanted to play my part in working towards a worldwide ban on these weapons.
At the Diana Award, we refer to her as a positive disruptor. She positively disrupted systems. She made you think outside of the box.
When Princess Diana died, we lost much more than a fashion icon. We lost a tireless campaigner for the underprivileged, for the weak, for people who didn't have a voice themselves. And her death left a great hole in society.
I think of the parents who this very night are standing around a hospital bed.
The two princes are far better equipped as a result of what she was and really how she was than they would have been if they'd had a mouse as a mum.
This summer marks 20 years since our mother died. From helping to shatter the stigma around AIDS, to fighting to ban landmines, and supporting the homeless, she touched the lives of millions. We can never know what our mother would have gone on to do. But in one sense, Harry and I feel that our mother lives on in the countless acts of compassion and bravery that she inspires in others.
I think Diana was aware, in fact very aware, that she was raising a future king. But I think what she wanted to do was to have, before a king, a person that was grounded in both love, affection, and the real world. And that is her principal legacy.
What we lost by Princess Diana's death was a beautiful woman, a beautiful princess who was a wonderful mother. Who's to know what her life would have led to? But she left, two extraordinary kids and an incredible legacy, which will live on forever.
And I love seeing the sort of uncomplicated way in which they deal with people and put them at their ease. It's so easy to connect the dots between them and their mother.
Somewhere in the world right now, a parent is making the grimmest of choices to risk cultivating mine-contaminated land or to let their families starve. That is no choice at all.
She was the biggest star, and then that star went out. And so now when we look at William and Harry, we look at them with a new feeling. Now they weren't just the royal family. They were boys who had lost their mom. And I don't think that's ever changed.
Well, what's amazing to me is that the passing of time, that now, William and Catherine are sort of nearly the same age as Diana when she died. One of the great tragedies, of course, is that Diana would have been the best grandmother ever.
How's that?
I love the fact that there's still such veneration inside her immediate family for what she was and what she meant, and I think that's fantastic.
That luster that Princess Diana brought to the monarchy is still there, even today.
As a feminist, I believe that Diana's legacy to women and to the world in general is that she ultimately became the writer of her own story. That she began as just a leaf in the wind with no real direction, doing what was expected of her, and then simply being a reactor, reacting to things, but with no clear vision of who she was, what she wanted to do, or what she wanted to be. And through a long and painful personal journey that took her to some very dark places, she ultimately came out the other side and became a confident, directed, controlled woman who had agency, autonomy, and authority. Those three things that every modern woman needs, and that she finally won.
It's easy in the day, but harder in the night.
There can never be another Diana. She represented one moment in time when the world changed, really. She was a new brand of royal.
If we all play our part in making our children feel valued, the result will be tremendous.
To go out and do all those things against the odds made her a powerhouse that will never be forgotten.
Well, how much do you sell them for?
£3.10, that one's very good.
Is that all?
We'll have princesses, we'll have celebrities, we'll have royals, but there will never be someone like her.